He's nervous, but on the surface he looks calm and ready to drop bombs. But he keeps on forgetting what he wrote down. The whole crowd goes so loud. He opens his mouth, but the words won't come out. He's choking how? Everybody's joking now. The time's up, clock's over. Pow! Snap back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, he's so mad, but he won't give up that.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
That's all I know of the song. Hey guys, welcome to today's video. Believe it or not, that actually does have something to do with what I'm talking about. Horrible imitations of Eminem aside. Rap stands for rhythm and poetry, and poetry specifically is something really interesting. See, poetry is something we assume only has to do with prose, the written word, or in some cases, the rapped word. Point is, it's a beautiful form of art that a lot of people misinterpret or misunderstand. We all know that typically it's just something written down on a piece of paper to communicate emotions. Sometimes it rhymes, sometimes it doesn't, but that's not all it is. Now don't get me wrong, the dictionary definition would leave it as just that. However, I think it's evolved since then. Poetry is the ability to take a word, take a sentence or a phrase, and intertwine it with a future phrase, to cause the whole thing to wrap in back on itself to create a beautiful tapestry of words, thoughts, and ideas. Now, why am I talking about this? Why am I discussing this? I do promise it has something to do with the topic of today's video, which I'm sure is why you clicked on it, which would be Critical Role Campaign 2. Now, that being said, let this be your spoiler warning. I'm talking about literally the largest spoiler in the entire campaign. I can't get around it. So please go ahead and skip around if you don't want to watch that. Go watch the campaign and come back to this eventually. But I assume you know what you've gotten into, so let's jump into it. I'm talking today specifically about the final villain of Campaign 2, Lucian, or as some might know him, Mollymog. And yes, this does have to do with poetry. If you'll just indulge me for a second, we're actually going to talk about George Lucas. I know, already I'm jumping all around the place, but hold on with me. George Lucas once said that Star Wars acted like poetry, in the ways that it would rhyme and reference itself to constantly create a narrative which would always be a little different, but would always reference back on itself.
And instead of destroying the Death Star, he destroys the ship that controls the robots. Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
Now, Star Wars is by far not a well-written series. I know it's a very well-loved series. I love it. It was a huge part of my childhood, but yeah, there's a lot of difficulties with the actual storytelling.
Ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Now get out of here.
No, Mrs. Stay!
But that being said, the idea of wrapping this story back in on itself constantly to reference itself and rhyme with its previous iterations is fascinating. In the same way that we see Luke come of age, we see Anakin fail to come of age. In the same way that we see Luke try to save the day, we see Anakin, as Darth Vader, end up saving the day in the ways that Luke tried to. And this is the same for Critical Role. See, the end villain of Campaign 2 was one of the player characters, Mollymog. And I guarantee you that at the beginning, that was not the plan. Yes, Matt knew who Lucian was, but I'm pretty certain that the final enemy would not have been Lucian had Mollymog not ended up dying in a very tragic way.
And it slams into his face. Respect. And then twists the blade. The life leaves Molly.
Eyes never shut.
And so yes, in some ways I think you can see where I might be going with this. You could see that a player character ended up being the final villain, but that's not really what I want to focus on. Instead, I want to focus on how Lucian ended up being the perfect final tie-in to be a villain who represented everything the campaign had stood for. Many times when we play TTRPGs, the Dungeon Master is improvising a lot. It doesn't matter how much of a DM you actually set up in the world. It doesn't matter how much you plan. Something will go wrong. Something will cause you to have to look back at everything that you've written down and toss it aside. The #1 defining moment of my DMing in my entire life was the first game that I ever ran, when I looked down at the note and literally had to toss them across the room and just start making stuff up. It's part of the core of TTRPGs, is to look across the table, notice something in one of the player's eyes, and realize that's what you're going to do. This is the moment you're going to focus on. And so we focus in on Molly. Molly, I talked about many times before. If you want to go watch some of the videos, you can go right up there or there, wherever the card pops up. I've talked about him a lot. And I've talked about the fact that he really was the core heart of the campaign, because he represented the struggle that every character would have. And that is, how do you find somebody to care about you? And how do you truly let them care about you? How do you find a family. And that is a core tenet of most TTRPG campaigns, because it's just basically the entire thesis of what we're doing. Sitting around a table, caring about each other, putting our emotions on display in the form of a character, and telling a story together. We are connecting with people, and thus there's this feeling of family. Because we lose together, we win together, we grieve together, we celebrate together. And that's exactly what Campaign 2 was about. It was about a bunch of misfits, a bunch of nobodies who could not love themselves, but learned to love others, and through that, love themselves, which is beautiful. And Molly was kind of the culmination of this. This weird character, this insane person who would constantly intentionally antagonize everybody.
We're looking for this, and I hold up a folded piece of paper.
What will you give me for it?
I'll give you a whole gold piece.
Oh, no, something. I don't want money, I want something. Give me something.
2 gold pieces.
Not gold pieces. What do you have?
Let me look. I have a vial of acid.
That'll do.
What is this?
It's a blank piece of...
Because Molly liked who they were. They knew that they used to be somebody else in the past, but they didn't care about that. They just cared about who they were now, and they liked it. They liked being a genuine asshole. They liked being flamboyant. They liked being out there and insane. It was fun. It was them. And so when Molly would eventually end up dying, this caused each of the characters to have to reflect on themselves. They saw somebody who was living life to the fullest, being themselves, and get cut short. And if that could happen to Molly, of all people, then what would it mean to the rest of them? Should they evaluate their lives? Should they evaluate who they are? And it would lead to every single character constantly having to ask themselves that question. Even eventually, Talison's new character, Caduceus. But why is this poetry? Why do I say it wraps in on itself? Because Lucian ended up being the final villain of the campaign, and for several sessions, they traveled alongside him. They worked with him. Despite the fact that he was the final villain, they were constantly having to interact with him, and you could see that suddenly, because of the lessons that Molly had taught them, they were insistent on teaching Lucian the same lessons. That there was more to life, that there was more there, that Molly could still be in there, that it was more than just power. It was about finding that found family. And so they would continue to embrace this, to try and push Lucian, and we see so many scenes of them really attempting to do this. One of the most iconic being Jester's tarot reading of Lucian.
See, now that's a nice offer.
Do you want me to read your tarot cards?
Certainly.
Really? You know, I learned this from Molly. Does that change your opinion of it?
No, I'm just curious.
Okay. Oh, well then, sit down with me. And we'll sit down across from Lucian.
I grab Bo by the wrist just to quiet her.
Hold on, I gotta pull up my list.
He sits in front of you, his sword's clanging into the side.
I'll take out the deck of cards and I'll fan them out in front of him and say, choose 3 cards.
Sid cocks to the side, reading very clearly the the lack of confidence in the delivery.
Set them in order in front of you. Yeah. Roll a d20, sir.
Nine.
Oh, how fucking perfect.
Wow.
Okay, oh,
game,
wow.
I swear to God.
Okay, so flip over the first card. This is the card of your past. And I look down at it. This card is history and the dream. How fucking crazy is that? Oh my god.
He gives a smile and a nod. Eyes unblinking.
Whoa. A massive creature shatters a city. Shut up. That's so fucking perfect. What? Okay, flip the next card. Whoa, this is your present. The Tyrant. 2 dragons fight each other in a figure 8. The one facing you is red. Flip your last card. This is your future.
18.
Wow. This card is so important.
So impressive.
you're good at this.
This is the card. Facing you is death. That's not necessarily a bad thing, Lucian. You know, some people think that death means a rebirth. Something must end for something new to begin.
His right hand twitches, like twice.
How do you feel?
Thank you, that was interesting. I've always been oddly curious from a distance about such strange hobbies. Thank you for indulging in the offer.
Of course.
Of reminding him of what was previously there, and Matt finally giving them the smallest glimpse that maybe Molly was still in there somewhere. But of course, Lucian betrays them, and they betray Lucian, as was expected, and he finally achieves his final form, this ascended version of a bastardized god. And they have to fight him. And through this battle, we see them kind of throw combat to the wind. Yes, they're still fighting, don't get me wrong, but they're focused more trying to get through to Molly. They are spending so much time doing this that Matt actually adds a mechanical benefit to doing so. That every time they begin to burst through that moment, every time they start to bust down that wall, Lucian grows a little weaker, a little less determined, a little less certain of what he's doing, but it's not enough. They do eventually have to kill him. They don't have a choice. It's either them or him. It's either Exandria or him, so they do so. And by doing so, they've killed a friend for a second time. And they try as hard as they can to bring him back, but it's just not enough.
Oh no!
I can't believe that just happened.
The magic feels like it finds something. But maybe it's because it's just a fragment of the spirit. It's not strong enough to bring it back. It's not strong enough magic. And as the light fades, the body is restored. The wounds are cleaned. And there before you is the body you remember as Malamok Tea Leaf.
And when I mentioned poetry, the thing about poetry is that it's supposed to be created, designed by somebody. And yet, in this moment, it's not. Instead, it is the dice and random chance that creates the final stanza of this poem, that creates the final thing that brings it all together. Because we have Caduceus' character, Taliesin, who used to play Molly, who didn't know Molly, take the time to make a roll and ask his god, they've been through enough, please just bring him back.
Whatever it was, just put it back. I think they've earned it. Put it back.
God, I fucking love this game.
And the dice work. It brings back this character, and they get to have not Molly, but instead the pure emotions of their previous friend, now without any of the memories which once burdened them. Now a new individual, a fresh, clean slate, who would then learn the lessons that they had learned because of Molly. He would learn found family. He would learn to care for everybody again. He would learn the same lesson they were trying so hard to teach Lucian because they had learned it, because Molly had learned it. Poetry, rhyming in on itself. I think a good dungeon master is aware of what players want. I think a great dungeon master is able to present it to them in a way that feels narratively cohesive, and I think the greatest dungeon masters have the ability to do so in a way that ties it all together for the players and the characters. But it cannot happen without that random chance, without the core of TTRPGs. The reason I love them, the randomness of storytelling. I think it's beautiful and really hard to encapsulate, but this moment rang very strangely emotional to me the first time I watched it, but I was never able to figure out why. I felt dissatisfied by the end of campaign 2 because it felt like it came out of nowhere. They just kind of got blindsided by it and it was done. I felt like these characters had been taken from me before their time. But even with all that, there was a part of me that was satisfied, and it took me a while to figure out why. And it was because truly, I do think it was a good end to the campaign. because it did tie everything together in one of the most beautiful ways. And it's why I will always love TTRPGs. If you want to see more of my breakdowns on Critical Role, you can go right here and go through my whole catalog. And there will always be more coming because I love talking about this stuff. Go out into the world, make it your own.